I can never resist telling when we're talking about listening. One talks about a man who was rather deaf, and his family substituted writing messages to him. But he did visit his doctor in the hospital and had a minor surgical procedure that restored a good measure of his hearing. When he had his next checkup with his doctor, the doctor asked, "Well, your family must be pleased that you can hear them better now." He said, "I haven't told them that. I'm busy listening to what they have to say about me, and I've changed my will 5 times so far." I'm tempted to ask all of us here and online, who considers themselves to be excellent listeners? Excellent listeners. I would ask you to raise your hands, but no, I won't. I don't want people to be embarrassed, but think about it, just the same. Listening for what God has to say is central to faith. The word for this kind of listening is called discernment. Sorting through the many things going on in our lives to hear, see, feel, and be acknowledging of those things that are too deep sometimes for words to say. If God never said anything in the past, there would be no Bible. If no one ever listened to God, there would be no church of people who depend upon God who is still speaking and people who are still listening. It wouldn't make any sense if there was nothing being said. Jesus recognized our problem with listening when he once quoted the prophet Isaiah, when Isaiah said to his people, "The people of God in relationship to God listen but don't understand," Isaiah said. They look at life but don't really see what's going on at a deeper level. They act like they're hard of hearing when it involves God's word to them. And they often do not listen deeply enough to allow God's word to move from their head to their heart, where it can transform and change their lives personally. Change and healing can happen in broken places when you hear deeply what God has to say. There are few things more frustrating than to talk to somebody who you think is not really listening to you. They're busy. That is one reason why we assume that God is very patient and long-suffering, because we can pray at any time of the day and night and by faith know that God listens. Listening with understanding to what others are saying is not one of humanity's strongest traits. That's why we teach children at an early age not to interrupt, but to listen first. The self-control for containing one's feelings and ideas and thoughts and opinions and not interrupting must be learned. And some adults, not you and me, of course, I know I have a mask on, but I'm laughing and I'm smiling, are rather slow in learning it, and even adults. Many folks like to talk more than they like to listen. It's easier to do that. We hear the noise of other words, but we often misunderstand the content. Or we don't hear it at all, or we're only half listening. Another funny story are 2 women sitting in the salon. One says, it takes 7 Angora goats to make one of those Angora sweaters you see over there. And the other woman looks up from her magazine and says, "It's amazing what you can teach animals to do." An example of half listening, half thinking, I might add. Another listening problem occurs when we think we understand what we have heard, but we do not. Humorous anecdotes sometimes help us to listen, so here goes another. This one I remember sharing with someone here at the church. Mr. and Mrs. Hindeman of Toledo tell the following humorous story. They had attended a crowded theater program, and afterwards, Mrs. Hindeman needing eye drops for her eyes every 4 hours, the time had arrived. So she said, "I need to go to the restroom and put eye drops in." when they saw the restroom line, it was so long, she gave up on the idea. She said, for all to hear, she said, oh, I can't get to the restroom, so I'm going to have to do it right here. Results was there was a lot of empty space around the Hindeman family. What was said and what was understood by others were two different things. Listening, thinking that you understand when you don't, then responding all wrong. Listening is of huge importance if you take seriously the Old Testament, Prophet Micah, and the New Testament, Gospel of Mark, and see what they have to say about it. Some 700 plus years before Jesus, the prophet Micah rose up among his people in the region called Judah and declared their national problems to be the fruit of not listening to God. For centuries they had been rescued and given guidance by God, but they repeatedly took it upon themselves to pat themselves on the back, make their own choices, and not discern the will of God correctly. They were more concerned with their own opinion. The consequence of not listening had now resulted in a threat to their very existence at the hands of an approaching aggressor. Their social, political, moral, and spiritual lives were far from what God would have them be because they had not listened or sought carefully to discern for a long time what the will of God was in their midst. And now their society was ripe for a takeover by an unscrupulous foreign power. Again, in the Gospel of Mark, what God would have us know about Jesus is right there in just a few words, expressed in three of those words by his presence with three disciples. It came as a revelation from heaven, and the word was, "This is my beloved Son. Listen to him." Listen to him. It's still the message for our church, or faithful, or any church or faithful follower of Jesus, to keep front and center. Know Jesus, listen to him. Turn to him regularly like you would say to your best friend. And listen to what Jesus has to say about your life and mine, with all of its implications for relationships, friendships, marriages, families, nation, and world. Listen to him. God speaks through Jesus. But we must listen, understand correctly, and respond faithfully. Some of the same problems we have in listening to others, we also have with God. Impaired listening has many causes, but three of the fairly common ones are being judgmental is number one. Two, our personal agendas that occupy us. And number three is the fear of conflict and controversy. First, being judgmental, we don't listen well to people we judge are wrong, or people we don't like, or people whose interests or politics aren't the same as ours. Rather than listening well to them and welcoming conversation, we spend energy working on our arguments against their thoughts, or we ignore them altogether. Apply to listening to Jesus and knowing what you know of what he teaches, what he claims. How far will you go putting his way of life into practice and sharing your knowledge of it enthusiastically with others, and risking your own reputation by standing firm in his teachings and way of life in the midst of the issues of society today, even when doing the faithful thing is controversial. As a listener to Jesus, which one of his teachings in the Bible are your favorites and draw you close to him? And which ones do you avoid because you judge them as wrong or too difficult to follow? This is a form of what we call selective listening, choosing what we like and rejecting the rest. A second impairment to listening can be the force of our own agendas. We like the way we think about things. We like the plans we have, the way we do things, and we don't want to change. We tend not to listen well when we have made our plans for the day, and then someone interrupts us with an unexpected insight or an unexpected need. We walk past people all day. We never hear their needs, largely because it takes time to listen to someone. And our personal agendas are already full with little time to stop and listen. In walking past people, following the beeline of our agendas, we miss our hunger. We miss their hunger. We miss their loneliness, their challenges, their disappointments, their heartaches, their frustrations, their joys, their losses and interests. We never really get to know them. It's no different with Jesus. We miss a lot of our relationship with him and what we could learn if we find little or no time in our agendas to listen to him. The third impairment to listening is the fear of conflict or controversy. We do not listen well to people we strongly oppose or disagree with. Our feelings and opinions flood our minds and dull our hearing. Our concentration falls apart. We miss understanding another person's point of view. When we disagree with someone, we tend to hear only what we want to hear, and we throw out the rest. Now, applying that to Jesus, we must beware of doing that. Because when push comes to shove, many things that Jesus taught are regularly compromised in the everyday marketplace of life. In relationships, the standards of Jesus' teaching are regularly ignored. Listening to Jesus, being his friend and disciple, means taking time to listen by reading, studying, sharing with others their thoughts and ours, and meditating upon his recorded thought in the Bible, engaging in a prayerful and daily relationship. As in any relationship, real listening requires work and effort and devoted time. It's true for friends who take the time to listen and do it for others, and for spouses who listen to their spouses, and busy parents who still have time to really listen and understand their children, and children who listen and really come to understand their parents. All of us, as we hear God speaking of his beloved Son, Jesus, and saying quite clearly, listen to him. We all have a calling to do that, a challenge to do that, and let's be happy to do that.